Pay attention to this security camera footage. October 17, 2022, Plainfield, New Jersey. The camera shows the exit of a county courthouse. Two people leave separately, minutes apart. They do not speak. They do not look at each other. Nothing dramatic happens. No argument. No raised voices. Inside that building, a judge confirmed that a marriage was ending and that everything built over 20 years would now be divided by law. Outside, they walked away in opposite directions. One of them believed the decision was temporary. The other understood it was final. By the end of the night, only one of them would still be alive. Nyanika Ratort was 43 years old. She lived in a quiet suburb of Plainfield, New Jersey, in a two-story house she and her husband had purchased more than a decade earlier. She was a co-owner of a small commercial property maintenance company that serviced office parks and medical buildings across 3 counties. Her role in the business was administrative and operational: payroll, contracts, scheduling, vendor relations. She was known among employees as methodical and reliable, someone who answered messages late at night and kept handwritten notes in neatly labeled folders. Friends described her as reserved, precise, and reluctant to complain. She spoke regularly with her parents by phone and met one close friend for coffee every Sunday morning without fail. Samiresh Deshmukh was 46. He presented himself as the public face of the same company. Client meetings, negotiations, equipment purchases, and expansion decisions. He handled accounts that required authority and confidence. To customers, he appeared disciplined and controlled. He rarely raised his voice and was known for arriving early and leaving last. Neighbors saw him as dependable, someone who maintained the yard himself and washed both cars on Saturday mornings. The business had grown steadily under his direction, not rapidly, but without major losses. It generated enough income to support the household, pay off loans, and maintain modest savings. The couple was not wealthy, but financially secure. They had been married for 19 years. Their relationship began in the late 1990s after both had already been working in the United States for several years. They built their lives gradually, without major interruptions. There were no children. Their routines were stable. Weekdays revolved around work. Evenings were quiet. They ate dinner together most nights, usually at home. On weekends, they handled errands, reviewed invoices, or visited acquaintances within a small social circle tied to work and family. From the outside, there was little to distinguish their marriage from others in the neighborhood. Privately, the balance inside the partnership had shifted over time. While the company was legally co-owned, control was increasingly centralized. Major financial decisions were routed through Samiresh. Access to certain accounts and documents was limited. Nyanika remained responsible for execution but had less authority over outcomes. This arrangement did not attract attention from clients or employees, and it was never publicly disputed. Within the household, it produced friction that accumulated quietly. In early 2022, Nyanika began consulting a family law attorney. She did not inform her husband at first. She asked questions about division of jointly owned businesses, real property, and financial disclosure obligations. The consultation notes later reflected a consistent concern: the preservation of her share of assets and her ability to disengage without destabilizing the company. In June 2022, she formally filed for divorce in Union County Superior Court. The filing requested dissolution of the marriage and an equitable division of marital property, including the business. The filing was served to Samiresh by courier. There was no immediate public reaction. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At work, operations continued unchanged. At home, conversations became brief and procedural. Both remained in the house while the case moved forward. The court scheduled an initial hearing for September. No restraining orders were requested. No allegations of abuse were filed. The process advanced as a standard civil matter. By the time the hearing date arrived, the marriage existed primarily on paper. What remained shared were assets, obligations, and an unresolved dispute over control. The court session would not resolve those issues, but it would confirm that they were no longer negotiable privately. The legal process had begun, and neither party could reverse it unilaterally. On the afternoon of the hearing, both parties appeared as required. They left the courthouse separately, but within minutes of each other, captured by fixed exterior cameras mounted above the main entrance. Their expressions were neutral. No interaction was recorded. The case file reflected no rulings, only continuance and instructions for further disclosures. From a procedural standpoint, nothing had concluded. From a practical standpoint, the situation had entered a phase where outcomes would be decided by force of law rather than mutual consent. Later that afternoon, Samiresh Desmukh contacted Nainika Rathod directly. The message was brief and practical. He suggested meeting privately to discuss finances and the future of the business, specifying that lawyers were not needed. There was no reference to reconciliation. The tone was transactional. Nainika agreed. Within minutes, she informed a close friend of the plan. She said that Samiresh wanted to talk and that she intended to meet him that evening to clarify unresolved issues. According to the friend, Nainika sounded controlled and focused. She did not describe the meeting as confrontational. She framed it as an attempt to resolve outstanding financial questions before the next legal step. At approximately 7:10 p.m., a fixed surveillance camera at a commercial parking lot recorded Nainika arriving alone. She parked, exited the vehicle, and walked out of frame. She carried only a handbag. Her movements showed no urgency or distress. The timestamp placed the footage several hours after her communication with her friend. No additional verified footage of Nainika was recorded after this moment. That night, Nainika did not respond to calls or messages. Initially, the silence did not raise immediate alarm. The context of an active separation made temporary absence plausible. Her friend assumed the meeting had extended or that Nainika had chosen to stay elsewhere overnight. By the following day, the lack of contact became more concerning. Multiple calls and messages went unanswered. The friend attempted to determine whether Nainika had mentioned plans to travel or stay away. She then contacted Samiresh directly. His response was measured. He confirmed that they had planned to talk. He stated that the conversation had been tense but nonviolent. He added that, given the divorce proceedings, he assumed Nainika had decided to stay somewhere else to think. He did not indicate urgency. He did not report concern. No missing person report was filed at that stage. There were no signs of forced disappearance. Nainika's personal belongings were not immediately located in an unusual state. The absence was framed as voluntary, shaped by the expectation that separation often involves sudden distance. As the day progressed without contact, the explanation began to weaken. The absence extended beyond what had been described. No one could confirm her location. No independent sighting followed the recorded parking lot footage. What had initially appeared as a personal choice began to take on the characteristics of an unresolved disappearance. The assumptions holding the situation together were based entirely on context, not evidence. Once those assumptions were tested, they would not withstand scrutiny. On the second day without contact, Nainika Rathod's friend contacted local police. The report was cautious in tone. She stated that Nainika had not responded to calls or messages since the evening she planned to meet her husband. She emphasized that this was unusual behavior and that Nainika had not indicated plans to travel or cut off communication. The officer recorded the information as a welfare concern rather than an emergency. Police contacted Samiresh Deshmukh the same day. He confirmed that he and Nainika had met privately after the court proceedings. He described the conversation as difficult but calm. According to him, the discussion focused on finances and the business. He stated that Nainika left afterward and that he believed she had chosen to stay elsewhere. He reiterated that they were in the middle of a divorce and that temporary separation was expected. No inconsistencies were noted at that time. Based on the available information, the case was not immediately classified as a missing person investigation. Nainika was an adult with no medical conditions reported, no history of threats, and no indication of coercion. The possibility of voluntary absence remained the working assumption. Over the next several days, officers conducted limited checks. Hospitals in the area were contacted. No admissions matched Nainika's description. Her credit cards showed no activity after the night she was last seen. Her phone remained inactive. There were no travel records under her name. None of these findings contradicted the voluntary absence theory, but they did not support it either. During this period, Samiresh remained visible. He answered calls from police promptly and agreed to provide information if needed. He spoke to acquaintances about the separation, stating that Nainika needed space. He did not initiate a search himself, but he did not discourage others from looking. His demeanor was described as controlled and practical. At the same time, changes occurred within the jointly owned business. Banking records later showed that, within 48 hours of Nainika's disappearance, Samiresh accessed the company's primary accounts and modified administrative permissions. Certain automated payments were paused. He assumed sole control over day-to-day financial operations. When asked later, he explained that the actions were taken to maintain stability during uncertainty. As days passed without contact, concern increased among those who knew Nainika well. Her friend returned to police with additional information. She reiterated that Nainika had specifically mentioned meeting Samiresh and had not expressed any intention to leave indefinitely. She described Nainika as cautious and communicative, not someone who would disappear without notice. This statement was formally documented. Police expanded their inquiry. Surveillance footage from nearby commercial areas was reviewed. One recording from the evening in question confirmed Nainika's presence alone at a parking lot. No footage showed her afterward. Her vehicle was not immediately located. With no confirmed sightings, no financial activity, and no communication, the explanation of voluntary absence became increasingly strained. The case was formally reclassified as a missing person investigation. Detectives were assigned. The focus shifted from assumption to verification. From that point forward, every statement, action, and omission would be evaluated against a narrowing timeline. What had been treated as a private matter began to enter the domain of documented fact. The process that followed would depend not on intent or belief, but on what could be proven to have occurred after Nainika Rathod was last seen alive. The shift from uncertainty to inevitability began with the recovery of Nainika Rathod's vehicle. 6 days after the welfare check, a patrol officer located her car parked on a municipal access road bordering an industrial service area less than 5 miles from her home. The vehicle was intact. There were no signs of collision, forced entry, or mechanical failure. The car was locked. Its position suggested deliberate placement rather than abandonment. Inside the vehicle, detectives noted an item that did not belong to Nainika, a pair of heavy-duty work gloves consistent with those used by employees of the maintenance company she co-owned. The gloves were photographed, bagged, and logged. Preliminary field testing indicated the presence of biological material. The vehicle was sealed and transported for full forensic processing. When detectives informed Samaresh Deshmukh that the car had been found, he acknowledged recognizing the gloves. He stated that they were his and suggested they may have been left in the car earlier during shared use. He denied being in the vehicle on the night Nainika disappeared. His explanation was noted without comment. Laboratory analysis contradicted the informal explanation. DNA testing confirmed that the gloves contained Samiresh's DNA on the interior and Nainika's blood on the exterior surface. The blood was determined to be fresh at the time it was deposited, consistent with the date of disappearance. No evidence suggested secondary transfer. The implication was direct contact during or immediately after injury. With that result, detectives obtained a search warrant for areas associated with Samaresh's work routes. K-9 units were deployed near the industrial zone where the vehicle had been located. Less than 12 hours later, officers discovered a concealed area behind a decommissioned service embankment on property formerly serviced by the couple's company. Nainika Rathod's body was recovered at the site. The location showed signs of recent disturbance, but no attempt at deep burial. Vegetation had been displaced, and soil compression was visible. There were no personal effects beyond clothing. The area was accessible by vehicle and not visible from the road. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy within 48 hours. The findings were unambiguous. Nainika died from blunt force trauma to the head. The injury pattern indicated a single, forceful strike delivered at close range. There were no defensive wounds. There were no indications of prolonged struggle. Time of death was estimated to be the evening she was last seen on camera. The cause and manner of death ruled out accident, natural causes, and self-inflicted injury. The case was officially classified as homicide. At this point, the investigator framework changed. The timeline was fixed. The meeting after court became the last known interaction. The presence of Samaresh's gloves in the vehicle connected him physically to the scene. The location of the body aligned with areas he knew through his work history. Detectives obtained additional warrants for digital records, financial access logs, and property searches. Samaresh was brought in for a formal interview, now as a person of interest rather than a cooperative spouse. His previous statements were reviewed against the emerging evidence. From this moment forward, the direction of the case could no longer shift. The facts established a sequence that did not allow alternative explanations. The remaining question was no longer whether a crime had occurred, but how the actions following the courthouse meeting aligned with the intent revealed by the evidence. The formal interview of Samiresh Deshmukh took place the morning after the body was recovered. By that point, investigators had secured warrants covering his phone records, vehicle data, business accounts, and the marital residence. The interview was recorded in full. Samaresh repeated his earlier account. He confirmed meeting Nainika on the evening of October 17th. He stated that the conversation focused on finances and the business and described it as tense but controlled. He said Nainika left alone and that he did not follow her. When asked about the gloves found in her car, he again suggested prior incidental contact. He denied causing her injury or knowing how her blood came to be on the gloves. Investigators confronted him with the forensic findings. The bloodstain pattern analysis showed direct contact at the time of injury. The timing aligned with the estimated time of death. There was no evidence of secondary transfer. Samaresh did not offer an alternative explanation. He became quiet and requested a break. The interview was paused and later resumed with counsel present. Parallel to the interview, detectives analyzed digital and financial records. Location data placed Samaresh's work vehicle near the industrial access road during the relevant time window. The vehicle made an unaccounted stop consistent with the location where the body was later found. This stop did not align with any documented work assignment. Bank records showed that within hours of Nainika's disappearance, Samaresh accessed the company's primary operating account. Administrative permissions were changed, and Nainika's access was removed. 2 scheduled transfers requiring dual approval were paused. These actions occurred after the meeting, but before any report of concern was filed. When questioned later, Samaresh stated that he was securing the business during uncertainty. Investigators noted that the divorce filing legally restricted unilateral control. A search of the Marital home yielded additional corroboration. Investigators found cleaning supplies consistent with removal of biological material in the garage area. Trace analysis detected diluted blood residue not visible to the naked eye. No attempt had been made to report an accident or seek medical assistance. The medical examiner's findings further narrowed the sequence of events. The nature of the head injury indicated a single impact from a solid object. The absence of defensive wounds suggested surprise rather than confrontation. There were no signs of restraint or prolonged assault. The injury was consistent with an impulsive but decisive act rather than an extended struggle. As evidence accumulated, investigators reconstructed the timeline. The court appearance established the immediate financial threat. The private meeting removed witnesses. The injury occurred shortly after. The body was transported using a vehicle familiar to the suspect. Subsequent actions focused on control of assets rather than emergency response. Samaresh was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and obstruction related to financial control during an active divorce proceeding. He did not make a statement at the time of arrest. By the end of the investigation phase, the case rested on a narrow but reinforced chain. Motive established by impending asset division. Opportunity created by the private meeting, physical evidence linking the suspect to the injury, and post-event conduct consistent with concealment rather than concern. The file was transferred to the prosecutor's office. Indictment followed within weeks. The matter moved from investigation to adjudication, where the focus would no longer be reconstruction but accountability. The indictment against Samaresh Deshmukh was filed in Union County Superior Court in December. The charges included first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction related to financial actions taken during an active divorce proceeding. Prosecutors argued that the killing was intentional and directly connected to an attempt to prevent the division of marital assets. Pre-trial motions focused on admissibility rather than narrative. The defense sought to suppress location data from the work vehicle and challenge the interpretation of the financial records, arguing that the actions taken after Nainika Rathod's disappearance were consistent with business continuity. The court denied the motions, finding that warrants had been properly obtained and that the records were relevant to motive and timeline. The trial proceeded without televised coverage. The prosecution presented its case chronologically. Jurors were shown the last surveillance footage of Nainika alive, the recovery of her vehicle, and the forensic analysis of the gloves found inside. The DNA evidence established physical contact at the time of injury. The medical examiner testified that death resulted from a single blunt force impact to the head, delivered at close range with no signs of defensive action. Digital evidence followed. Analysts testified regarding vehicle location data and timestamps, placing Samaresh near the recovery site within the estimated window of death. Financial experts explained the sequence of account access changes, emphasizing that these actions occurred before any formal concern for Nainika's safety was raised. The court admitted documentation showing that the divorce filing restricted unilateral control of shared assets.
The defense did not dispute the cause of death. Instead, it argued that the evidence failed to establish intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Counsel suggested alternative explanations for the presence of the gloves and characterized the financial actions as precautionary. Samaresh did not testify.
After deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts.
The court entered judgment accordingly. At sentencing, the judge referenced the established sequence: a legal process that threatened loss of control, a private meeting that removed witnesses, a fatal act, and subsequent steps taken to consolidate assets rather than seek help. The sentence imposed was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, with additional concurrent terms for the remaining charges.
Following conviction, the marital home was sold under court supervision. The business was dissolved, its contracts reassigned. Proceeds were directed toward restitution and legal costs. Nainika Rathod's estate was settled according to statutory distribution. No beneficiaries benefited from the act that ended her life. The case closed without procedural reform. Divorce proceedings continue to rely on disclosure and compliance. Financial control remained a common point of conflict. The record reflected no systemic failure, only the predictable outcome of a process in which one party concluded that legal division was unacceptable. The events did not escalate suddenly. They progressed through identifiable steps, each narrowing the range of outcomes. By the time the final step was taken, alternatives had already been rejected. The court documented the result, not as an anomaly, but as the endpoint of a sequence driven by motive, access, and choice.